Okay. Okay, so yeah, Cecilia, we just want Paul Nugent and myself to speak and to be seen. Everyone else was supposed to come in on the public link, not the speaker link. So I've deactivated your video because it's just Paul. He shared his link with people. So that's how you're all coming in as him. Okay. Except for the people who did join through Facebook. So welcome everyone to the Irish American Heritage Museum and the American Irish Historical Society. We're today partnered with sorry, I'm flipping between screens. We're partnered with Paul Nugent, who is the Executive Director of Southeast Connecticut World Affairs Council. And he's going to talk you through a trip that they're doing this September. Oh, God. A trip. Sorry, people have come back in. Lads, I'm taking your video off and I'm muting you. You're not the speaker, so we don't need it in here. Okay. So Paul, take it away. They're doing a trip in September to Dublin and Belfast, so he's just here to give you some information. This is not affiliated with either the American Irish Historical Society or the museum, but it was a good opportunity to showcase this trip that's coming up. So Paul will have all the answers. I don't know anything about the trip, and he will tell you the details at the end. Okay, so
great. Thank you, Elizabeth, and sorry about the technical glitch. That was my fault, folks. So as Elizabeth said, I am with the Southeast Connecticut World Affairs Council. So greetings from Southeast Connecticut today. We are a non-profit, non-partisan member of the World Affairs Council of America, of which there are some 80 chapters across the country. And we bring experts in international affairs, foreign policy to speak monthly to our members. We're interested in getting a travel program going, an international travel program. And so we're working with the Philadelphia World Affairs Council, which has a long history of running international travel programs and is one of the largest members of the World Affairs Council. And these are the other cooperating councils. So to get this idea off and running, I took it on myself to set up a trip in September of this year to Ireland. This is going to be educational, political, historical trip, and the focus will be partition, the Troubles, and Brexit. In other words, 100+ years of Irish history. I'm going to give you a quick outline of the trip itself, and then I'm going to talk about the historical and current affairs context on which the trip is based. And hopefully you'll get an idea of where this is coming from. And if you come on the trip, you should come home to the US with a better understanding of what's been happening in Ireland over the last 120 odd years and what may be happening in the future. So the trip is basically 5 days on the ground, 2 in Belfast, 3 in Dublin. I'll be leading the trip in Ireland. The cost per person sharing is is $3,995, and that's based on 10 travelers. So I'm going to try and keep it to 10 travelers. There is an additional cost for a single room, and this covers hotels, coach tours, presentations, some dinners, some meals, but does not include the flights. And the reason for that is so you can organize the flights yourselves and decide if you want to arrive earlier or if you want to stay on longer. The travel agent we're working with is providing an optional 4-day extension for golf enthusiasts. I won't be involved directly in that, and that'll be in the Dublin Wicklow area. The aim is to sign up with a $900 per person deposit and full payment by late June. Okay, so quickly to go through the trip, we'll start out in Dublin Airport on the 23rd of September. This will be day one. I'm going to suggest that people arrive even a day earlier to that, because this is a pretty hectic schedule. So it would be nice not to be stepping off a plane at 5 a.m. in Dublin, as I'm sure some of you have done. We'll take a private coach from Dublin to Belfast, check in at the Europa Hotel, and then we'll do a walking tour of Belfast. This is an interesting tour. It's actually conducted by effectively people who are former paramilitaries on both sides of the divide in Ireland, hence the two murals I'm showing. And they'll give you their version of the recent past, the Troubles particularly, and pass you through the so-called peace wall for the other side. And then that evening we'll do dinner, and I've lined up two speakers from Queen's University Belfast. Professor Katie Hayward is an expert on more current affairs, particularly how Brexit has affected Ireland. The second day, we'll visit the Titanic Museum and travel out to the Stormont Government buildings by coach. And that evening, then, we'll do another dinner and guest speaker, Professor Marie Coleman from Queen's, who's actually originally from Longford in the Republic of Ireland, and she'll speak about the historical context. Morning of day 3, then we'll head by coach down to Dublin, visit Kilmainham Jail, and then check in at Buswell's Hotel. This is a really well-placed hotel in the center of the city, half a block from Dáil Éireann, the Irish Parliament. So it's definitely a very safe neighborhood and a very interesting hotel with lots of stories itself. Kilmainham Jail, of course, is the place where the leaders of the 1916 rebellion were incarcerated before being executed by firing squad, hence the image. On day 3 in the afternoon, then we'll visit a very interesting, it's a house museum, 14 Henrietta Street. It's a Georgian house in Dublin, built in the early 1700s, started out as a private dwelling for a wealthy landlord, a wealthy Englishman. But by the late 19th century into the early 20th, it had become a tenement housing over 100 people. And some years ago, some people, a foundation organized to rescue this building from dilapidation and turn it into a living museum. And this is actually an article from the New York Times a couple of years ago. And then for those of you with the interest and the energy at that stage, we'll be about 10 minutes walk from an excellent pub called the Cobblestone Pub, which has traditional Irish music every evening at 5 o'clock. And in fact, the photo on the bottom right was one I took in April when I was there. And by 5:15, there were about 10 fiddle players, a harpist, as you can see, and several other musicians. On the day 4, on the 26th, we'll visit Irish government buildings, Dáil Éireann, which is literally just up the road from the hotel, walking distance. We'll have a private tour of the building. This is something that's available to Irish citizens. I have to thank my brother in Mullingar, County Westmeath, for organizing this for me. And then later on that evening, we'll have a presentation by a friend, Professor Jerry White, who's a constitutional lawyer at Trinity College Dublin, and he'll enlighten you as to the many changes that have happened in the Irish Constitution in the past 20-odd years. After lunch on day 4, we'll do a history walking tour of Dublin. This will focus mainly on 20th century history, a bit on 19th century, on the United Irishmen Rebellion, and then, of course, a lot about 1916. And then on day 5, we will visit the General Post Office in the center of Dublin and visit the 1916 museum there, which I have seen a couple of times myself, most recently back in April. Really a tremendous experience, very well done, sound and everything. And of course, these are the photo on the bottom left is the picture of the GPO bombed out after the rebellion. The GPO, the General Post Office, was the headquarters of the rebels on Easter week 1916. And the image on the top right shows what it must have been like inside towards the end of the rebellion. I'll talk more about that. And then after lunch, of course, no visit to Dublin would be complete without visiting Trinity College Dublin, We'll visit the campus, the Book of Kells, and the excellent library exhibition. And that evening, we'll have a farewell dinner. And then the next morning, Saturday morning, after breakfast, you'll either travel to the Dublin airport for an afternoon flight or continue with the optional 4-day golfing extension. Or if you have a personal itinerary or you want to stay on longer, I'm happy to suggest other sites in and around Dublin or outside Dublin that are relatively easy to get to outside Dublin. And certainly there's plenty more to see in the city. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is take some time to set the context for this trip. As I said, the focus is partition, the Troubles, and Brexit, 100 years of Irish history. And you can see on the map on the right, just to remind you all of nomenclature of terminology of the two large islands on the west coast of Europe. So you have England, Wales, and Scotland comprise Great Britain, which with Northern Ireland form the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And then south of Northern Ireland is the Republic of Ireland, and that black wavy line is the infamous border. Of course, before 1922, the whole entity was called the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. I'm going to talk a bit about the Troubles. I'm going to talk about the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, and then end up with a little on the future future of Ireland, including the possibility of a united Ireland. So clearly, one of the most important events of Anglo-Irish relations in the past 20-odd years was Brexit. And this is needless to say, a very brief summary. But in June 2016, in an effort by Prime Minister David Cameron to silence an anti-EU element within the Conservative Party, he called a referendum, fully expecting this so-called Brexit, or Britain exiting the European Union, to be defeated. And it wasn't. It won by a very slim margin. Out of a 70% vote, it went 52% to 48%. Interestingly, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and London voted to remain in Europe, and most of England and Wales voted to exit. Brexit, though, had an important implication for Ireland, and I would actually argue that the people who organized and beat the drum for this either didn't know what the implication would be, or frankly weren't really concerned. But the implication was that the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland became the only land border between the United Kingdom, which was then outside the European Union, and the European Union. And because the European Union is a trade bloc, it's a business bloc, there needed to be some way of monitoring movement of goods across that border. However, the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland effectively was disappeared after the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. And so there were two goals from the Irish perspective and the European Union, was to protect the single market and also to avoid a hard border. The way this was thought might work would be using the Northern Ireland Protocol, which would effectively put a customs border between the island of Ireland and the island of Great Britain. We don't have the time today to go through the shenanigans that went on over the next few years. Those of you who followed it will remember there were a lot of toing and froing, including in 2019 a major victory by the Conservative Party in a general election, which parenthetically is probably going to be reversed come July 4th. But they ended up anyway, the negotiations between the European Union and Great Britain and the UK ended up with the Windsor Framework on the 27th of February, And this set up effectively a differential customs tracking for goods going from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, and distinguished goods that were going to stay in Northern Ireland versus goods that were going to continue on into Ireland and hence into the European Union. And it's all about checking quality of goods, assigning appropriate regulations. This is kind of like the green and the red lines in a customs as you cross any border. Of course, the interesting thing about this agreement, which irked many people in Northern Ireland who considered themselves unionists or loyalists, they felt it pushed them further away from Great Britain and further closer to a connection to Ireland. And I'll come back to that later. I love the cover of The Economist in a United Ireland question mark. And this was the big green elephant in the room. And also an op-ed by Gerry Adams, the former president of Sinn Féin, in the New York Times on the 12th of July, argued that leveraging a majority Remain vote in Northern Ireland could lead to a united Ireland. So as I said earlier, the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to remain as part of the European Union. Now, of course, in Northern Ireland, people often, in the past at least, voted along religious lines or political affiliations identity. So one would have expected that the majority in the north of Ireland would vote to Brexit, to follow the Conservative Party out of Europe. But in fact, a slight majority voted to remain in Europe. And I would argue that that's because they actually want to be part of the European Union and not have to and be able to travel freely. To understand the history of Northern Ireland, the border, and where this all comes from, you have to realize there are effectively two traditions or identities in the island of Ireland. One is a loyalist, unionist, mostly Protestant traditionally, and I think it's manifested in this image of a soldier from the 36th Ulster Division at the Battle of the Somme. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme, July 1st, 2016, some 2,000 Ulster men died, and they would argue they demonstrated their loyalty to the United Kingdom and hence should be allowed to remain. The other tradition, identity in the island of Ireland is nationalist or Republican, and in Northern Ireland it's mostly Catholic, and it's manifested, I think, in the Easter 1916 rebellion I referred to earlier. This is an image of the centre of Dublin after the rebellion ended. Much of the centre of the city was bombed by British artillery to defeat the rebels. On the right, of course, is effectively the Irish Declaration of Independence that was read by Padraig Pearse outside the General Post Office on Easter Monday in 1916. Interestingly, and unfortunately the techie stuff is getting in the way, but there's another group developing, particularly in Northern Ireland, and actually in the Republic as well, but significantly in Northern Ireland, which is a non-sectarian, not identifying as Catholic or Protestant. They're mostly young people, and they're very Europe or world-oriented. And I believe that they will have a significant impact on any voting down the road for a united Ireland. So again, where did this Northern Ireland statelet develop from? Well, it came from the Anglo-Irish Treaty, effectively, which established the Irish Free State on December 6, 1921. On the left is the cartoon or the drawing representing the negotiations that went on into the wee hours of December 6th. And on the right is the New York Times announcement, Ireland to be a free state within the British Empire. And that's key because this agreement was not giving Ireland the status of republic. It was going to be the free state within the British Empire. And of course, it did actually in part led to the Irish Civil War, which went from June 1922 to March 23, in which former colleagues, IRA colleagues, volunteers, Irish volunteers, fought each other. The anti-treaty side were finally defeated and gave up, and Ireland became a parliamentary democracy. The partition of Ireland dates from this time, and it formed this 6 northeastern counties, became an independent statelet within the United Kingdom. So what happened to the Republic of Ireland afterwards? Well, Ireland really became very post-colonial in character, economics, etc., etc. It was still economically dependent on Britain, and the other key factor through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s was the influence and power of the Catholic Church. There was mass emigration with little industrial development. One bright note I always like to point out when I do this presentation is the image on the right. The gentleman on the left in that photo is the Minister for Education, Donogh O'Malley, who in 1966, somewhat apparently unilaterally, without necessarily discussing it with his colleagues in government, announced that there would be free high school education through to the age of 18 for all Irish boys and girls. Which was meant a tremendous thing for Ireland. I think it actually was one of the main factors driving the subsequent economic development of Ireland, and I've no doubt I personally benefited from that. Ireland joined the European Economic Community, as it was called back then in 1973, but the 1980s were a pretty bleak time. Unfortunately, the bottom of this graph is lost, but this is the drop. This is the unemployment rate, which drops in the early 1990s, and the rise on the right is 2008. But there was great unemployment in the 1980s, and there were so many Irish probably arriving illegally in New York that there was a green card lottery. Of which I personally benefited. So I arrived in the US in 1989 with a freshly minted PhD from University College Dublin and a green card. And then some remarkable things happened in Ireland in the 1990s and continue to this day. It started out with something called the Celtic Economic Tiger, but broadly it was a colossal societal liberalization and economic boom. I joked that they were waiting for me to leave. There are many key events in this in the last 30 odd years of these events. One was effectively an end of the control of the Catholic Church, a rise in gay rights and same-sex marriage. Actually, the graph on the right shows a referendum that was held. The image of Ireland on the right shows a referendum held in the Republic of Ireland, and almost all of the regions in Ireland voted in favor of same-sex marriage. There was one in the center that didn't vote, but it was an overwhelming positive vote for same-sex marriage. I can assure you this would not have happened when I was growing up. There was net immigration into Ireland rather than emigration. The Irish economy boomed. There was an incredible amount of multinational investment, particularly from the United States, and you can still see it in the glass and steel buildings that line the lower end of the River Liffey in Dublin, which when I was going to college in the 1970s was old warehouses and definitely not a place you'd want to visit. Now I would visit it, but probably couldn't afford to buy anything down there. And the other key, of course, from a political status was the visit by Queen Elizabeth II in 2011. And this image actually shows Queen Elizabeth having laid a wreath in the Garden of Remembrance to the leaders of various Irish rebellions, including 1916, which her government, in the past at least, had executed by firing squad. I think this was a tremendous move by the Queen. It was greatly appreciated by the Irish people. Sadly, Anglo-Irish relations have gone a bit downhill since then, but this was definitely a major peak in Anglo-Irish relations. Unfortunately, things did not go so well in Northern Ireland. The Troubles erupted in 1968. It started out really as a civil rights movement, trying to get equal housing and employment and benefits for Catholics who were very much a minority, a large minority in Northern Ireland, but were very much looked down on. The situation escalated. There were pogroms, and finally British troops were sent over from England to restore order. The local government was terminated. However, we all know, or most of you should know, where that went. Direct rule from London. There was a Bloody Sunday event when when Catholic marchers, unarmed, were fired on by British soldiers, 13 killed. There was various bombings in Ireland, in the north of Ireland, of course, almost every day in the bad times. In 1974, in May of 1974, actually the largest number of people killed in a single day during the Troubles were killed in 4 bombs that went off in the Republic of Ireland, 3 of them in Dublin and 1 in Monaghan. I was actually in Dublin that day with my mum, stepping onto a train in Connolly Station when we heard the bombs go off. And of course, there were bombs in London and Birmingham. And I'd argue that the IRA lost a lot of support in the Republic of Ireland because of that policy. Things improved dramatically after 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement. It effectively brought an end to the Troubles. It was organized to a large extent by the parties in Northern Ireland, the British government, the Irish government, and Bill Clinton, who contributed tremendously. A great example of the power of the Anglo-Irish, of the Irish-American involvement in Ireland. And George Mitchell, of course, Senator George Mitchell led that negotiation. Somebody commented that the peace process is like riding a bicycle. If you keep cycling, it's on course, but if you stop, it risks toppling over. And of course, on the bottom right is an image from the New York Times showing the result of the vote on the Good Friday Agreement, unanimously approved on both in the north of Ireland and in the Republic. The Irish Constitution actually had to be changed to allow this to happen, and Articles 2 and 3 were removed. And my friend Jerry will speak about this, I'm sure, during our trip. However, there's still a lot of unresolved issues in Northern Ireland, bringing guilty parties to justice. The image on the right shows a Netflix documentary, which is well worth watching. The massacre of a show band, a music group in, I think, 1972. The picture on the bottom right is one of the car bombs in Dublin. That's actually the side wall of Trinity College Dublin. And the police are trying to move a car out of the way. There were 3 people killed in that explosion, but many more killed in 2 other consecutive explosions in the city. And this is a piece, I think, from the Irish Times. Victims' families still seeking truth after a decision not to prosecute ex-Royal Ulster Constabulary officers. So there's still a lot of unresolved questions. The Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy Reconciliation Act is passed by the British government, which would argue that we shouldn't go after, we should let things lie and not go after people who committed terrible atrocities, including, of course, British soldiers and the British security forces. Another, unfortunately, leftover of the Troubles is the very divided communities. The militarized murals, the piece that you saw earlier in a slide, and we'll see when we visit Belfast, the peace walls that are still in place, separating Catholic and Protestant neighborhoods. The segregated schools, effectively still Catholic schools and Protestant schools, although there are some that are bridging the gap. And of course, issues around Northern Ireland government. The Northern Ireland local government was disbanded for a while, but it finally came back together on the 3rd of February. It's called the Northern Ireland Executive. And for the first time in 100-odd years of Northern Ireland history, the First Minister is a member of the Sinn Féin party. That's her on the left, Michelle O'Neill. The lady on the right is Emma Little-Pengelly, who's a member of the Democratic Unionist Party, the Loyalists. She's the Deputy First Minister. And what, of course, I love about this picture from Twitter is that they're playing hurling, definitely an Irish, Catholic, Irish nationalist game. The ball they're holding in their hands, the hurling ball, is called a schlitter, and the wags on Twitter call them hence the Schlitter sisters. But it's a remarkable thing to see a leading light in the Democratic Unionist Party chatting with a leading light in Sinn Féin. These folks would have been their parents would definitely have been mortal enemies or worse. So what is the conclusion and what's the future for Ireland? Well, some would argue that Brexit is actually part of a larger remaking of the United Kingdom. Will there be a united Ireland in the foreseeable future? This would require a majority vote in Northern Ireland and then a referendum in the Republic of Ireland to determine if those in the Republic want to take on Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland would not be able to exist as a country in itself. So I'm sure the people who will, well, one would hope the people who will organize this referendum will make sure that the second one will be positive before they do the first one. There are now a lot of confounding factors in Northern Ireland and the whole identity politics that we saw in the past, Catholic nationalist versus Protestant loyalist, is starting to dilute a little. Sinn Féin, as I mentioned earlier, you saw Michelle O'Neill. Sinn Féin is now pulling ahead in popularity, both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland. The graph on the right shows the results of the Irish general election of 2020, and you can see that Sinn Féin came in second place behind Fianna Fáil, which was a party that held power in Ireland for much of the 20th century, and ahead of the other main party, a bit like the Republicans and Democrats, Fine Gael. And in fact, to keep Sinn Féin out, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael formed a coalition. Again, the wags, of which there are many in Ireland, commented. These two parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, derived from the Civil War, and people commented somewhat ironically that the Civil War in Ireland was finally over if Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were going to come together. One of the concerns, I think, out of all this is what will be the response of disenfranchised, economically disadvantaged loyalists in Northern Ireland. The data here I'm showing, unfortunately, I lost the bottom again, but the graph at the top shows results of a recent 2023 survey in Northern Ireland of over 1,000 people, asking them to identify their national identity. And you can see 42% identified as British, 39% as Irish, 24% as Northern Irish. I guarantee you, if you had done this 40 or 50 years ago, that Northern Irish identity would not exist. I think that Northern Irish identity probably argues for people who don't want to identify along traditional lines. Religious identity is also interesting. This is from the graph on the bottom is from the 2021 census. Unfortunately, I've lost some of the image, but the purple line across the top is Catholics. But the interesting one is the black line that you can see rising up after 1961 to about 17% in 2021. There are people who did not identify as Catholic or Protestant in that census. Again, I can assure you, 40 or 50 years ago, that line, well, it was flat. I'm sorry, if you could see the rest of the graph, that line was flat. So this is a very much a new development in Northern Ireland, that there's a substantial minority of people who no longer identify as Catholic or Protestant, and probably don't even identify as Republican or Loyalist. I suspect that many are young people, educated, and they just want to get on with life. So what is the good news for the future? So the good news is that few people in Northern Ireland, especially the young, want to return to the Troubles. The article on the right's from the Guardian magazine, and it says time and Brexit have blurred the old hard lines on the border, and that is quite true. However, the bad news is the risk, in my opinion, the risk of an island-wide civil war that was avoided by 1921 partition. And what I mean by that is, I think there's a substantial number of people in Northern Ireland in the Loyalist tradition. I would say it's probably several thousand who probably would be willing to take up arms to prevent a united Ireland, under the rationale that if the Good Friday Agreement was brought about by 30 years of IRA war, and then that led indirectly through Brexit to a united Ireland 30 years later, then we will undo a united Ireland with 30 years of war. The bad news for the island of Ireland then is that will be an all-island war. Britain will be gone, and I'm sure they'll be glad to be rid of the Irish. Unless we can control that, that could be a real problem. The photo on the bottom right is the Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs in 2022, being whispered to by one of his security men on a visit to Northern Ireland that we need to vacate the building. There's been a bomb threat called in. Simon Coveney, he's now retired. And the UVF have, it is noted that the Ulster Volunteer Force is actively planning to target more Irish politicians. It's an article from the Irish Independent in 2022. So what is the important? So I believe there's an important role for Irish America, and especially the US government, in protecting the Good Friday Agreement and peace in Northern Ireland and the whole island of Ireland. And I would like to think that this trip I'm organizing to Ireland in September 23 to 28 will help a little in that way, to help to educate my fellow Americans on the truth about Ireland, the real story, not just the kissing the Blarney Stone and dangling your legs over the cliffs of Moher, which are fine and have their place, but I think understanding the politics, history, and current affairs in Ireland is at least as important. I've included my email address down there, xhibernia@gmail.com, and my phone number. Feel free to give me a call if you want to learn more about this trip. And I think, oh yes, I have to finish up with this slide. The picture on the left is from the centre of Dublin. That's the General Post Office in the background, and the gentleman on the slide is actually not an Irishman, a Scotsman, Jim Larkin, who's a great trade unionist. And it's the statue is taken from the still photo on the right, I think taken in 1913, when Larkin exhorted the Irish people that Ní úsil éon úsil ach sinna bheith íseal Iriamish. The great appear great because we are on our knees. Let us rise. And that's about it. I'm happy to take any questions. Elizabeth?
Yes, thank you. That seems to have gone very well. I will say we got one comment earlier that just to say 10 is the minimum that you can bring on the trip.
Correct. Yes,
maximum.
yes. 10 is the minimum to make the trip work at this price. I can probably do 12. I don't particularly want to do 12, to be honest, but I would. I think 10 is a good number in terms of getting around and managing the events.
Right, exactly, yeah. Now, So Noreen wants to know, could you talk a little more about the contributions Irish America can make in the future to help the peace process stable?
Oh, well, I think the greatest contribution can be made, and now this is very much wishful thinking on Paul's part, is to have an Irish American president in the White House. Um, I don't think Joe Biden will be there when Irish unity happens, but hopefully there'll be another Irish American. I actually had the pleasure the other day to meet um, Senator Murphy from Connecticut. I told him that I was looking forward to seeing a Murphy in the White House someday. Um, that's for the future. For now, I think the most important thing is to be aware of what's happening in Ireland, to be supportive in any way you can. One of which would be, of course, to visit Ireland and bring your Visa card or bring two of them. To be involved in organizations locally or nationally in the US. There are organizations that are intent on supporting the Good Friday Agreement, particularly. The Good Friday Agreement has its flaws, one of which I will tell you is probably that it actually tended to result in the continuation of this two-sided view of politics in the north of Ireland. Am I still on camera?
You are.
Right. Well, I'm going to hold up this book that I'm reading at the moment, which I would recommend to everybody to be educated. Perils and Prospects of United Ireland by Padraig O'Malley, a University of Massachusetts professor. It's a great book. So learn as much as you can about Ireland, get engaged, and maybe come on my trip.
I will say too, Paul, in terms of just practicality, our state controller here in New York, Tom DiNapoli, has heavily invested some of the public pensions in Northern Ireland, and they've been incredibly successful. Like, he's been honoured by Northern Irish, bureaus and the Irish government for basically putting his money where his mouth is. And there are there's a lot of employment opportunities and investment opportunities there, especially now with Brexit having complicated the whole issue, because some of the companies, that would have had maybe their base in London are now moving to Dublin or Belfast instead. And so because Northern Ireland is being treated as if it was part of the entire island of Ireland. And so the Brexit EU hard stop, that border kind of doesn't exist. So that has been very advantageous to Northern Ireland.
Oh, that's a really interesting specific example. I wasn't aware of that. I'm wondering, I should research if there are more examples like that of local governments in the US investing pension funds. But of course, the other big investment is American corporations. Like I intimate, I should probably get a picture and put it in my slides. But if you are in the center of Dublin, when you're walking down along the banks of the River Liffey towards the mouth of the river, or driving down, it's a remarkable collection of steel and glass. Google, Amazon, all the companies are there. I do remember in college in the 1970s, that was a bit of a no-go area.
Absolutely,
and that's all changed. And of course, other companies too have manufacturing, particularly in Ireland, including, of course, Pfizer in Cork and in County Kildare.
Any other questions? Those of you who joined us through the other link, you can use the Q&A feature down here on the bottom of your screen if you need to ask a question. Some of you may be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. I'll just check YouTube and make sure nobody's commenting on there.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, no problem. So tell them again the date to kind of have emailed you by and all that, just in case.
Yeah. So the trip is the 23rd to the 28th of September. So just to clarify again how this is working. So Southeast Connecticut World Affairs Council is working with, oh, by the way, you don't need to be a member of SECWAC or of the World Affairs Council to go on this trip. I should have probably mentioned that up front. But we're working with the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. They are a very, very experienced organization in running trips overseas. And they work with specific travel agents. So the actual on-the-ground logistics will be handled by bona fide travel agent. I'll be the person on the ground leading the trip, but I'll have a backup team helping me if there's any issues. The travel agent would like to have the full payment made by, they tell me, the 19th of June. I'm also, my colleague in Philadelphia tells me that can be stretched out to the end of June. But obviously, it needs to be paid by a certain time so they can, the travel agent can finalize the bookings for the hotels and the various activities. So I wouldn't go much later than 20th, 21st of June. But please, anybody who wants to contact me at that email or that phone number, if they have any questions, doubts, anything at all, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, good. So there are no more typed questions. I think you're doing a fantastic trip. It's great to go to both Belfast and Dublin, and that's one of the things since the Good Friday Agreement. One of the major areas of cooperation between both of the states. Excuse me, very warm here in my office. Between the states is the tourism is one of the things that is treated as an all Ireland concern.
That's right.
All Ireland, I should say, concern. So, the tourist board have done a great job in promoting the entirety of the island. It's easy to get around, there, and Belfast has really come on now with between the Titanic Museum and all those other things too. So I think you'll have a great time.
No, totally. Tourism is a very good example. Tourism and rugby, both very successful for all Ireland organizations.
Absolutely. Terry Ann is asking, are you going to visit any sites where the Irish-French Huguenots lived? There is that little graveyard down in Dublin.
Yes, they're actually there. You're very good. There is a cemetery right in the heart of Dublin. It's on, I think it's just down the street from St. Stephen's Green. Easily walkable from the Buswells Hotel. I remember seeing it, when I was in college in Dublin and when I lived in Dublin, and I passed it recently and it's still there. I don't know what the story is on access, but the Huguenots definitely were influential. And there's also I've forgotten the group, the people who have the meeting house. Quakers, yes, there's Quaker meeting house in Dublin as well. In fact, I went on when I was in Ireland in April in Dublin, I went on one of these history walking tours, and we were taken outside the Quaker, the building that was the original Quaker meeting house, was also the building where some of the United Irishmen met in prior to the 1798 rebellion. And in fact, Frederick Douglass met Daniel O'Connell there. So a lot of history back into the 19th century, but there's only so much one can.
And like Christ Church Cathedral has fabulous old Norman tombs, and
there's so much more. There's so much more to see in Dublin. I would strongly, if people are going to come on this trip, I would strongly recommend adding as many days on as you can. Even in Dublin alone, there's plenty to see. Never mind.
Kerry, the kingdom.
and Kerry, of course. Yes, absolutely. But even within an hour or less of Dublin, you can visit a 5,000-year-old megalithic tomb, Newgrange. Is older than the pyramids and Stonehenge.
Yeah, all that. Newgrange. What are they calling that now? The mythical East or something? I can't remember.
Oh yeah.
There's all these marketing jazz. Terry Ann said her people were down around Macroom and Cork, and there was Huguenots down there too. I mean, there's no doubt it's an ancient country, obviously, and very good at marketing itself and at its tourism, so that's it. If you do manage to add on a few dates, and normally the weather is beautiful in September, the kids are going back to school, it's kind of a fair time, the harvest.
You remember it well, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I do, June and September, we were always, definitely having a good time in the weather because we were still in school. But anyway, one more question, hang on. The Murphy family protected them. Oh, good. Okay. The Huguenots. Yeah.
A lot of Murphys in Cork. Yep.
So that's it, I think, guys. So take Paul's email address there. Very important. And, as I say, it sounds like a fantastic trip, even if you didn't add on. But the fact that you have flexibility with, maybe your own flights, means
Yeah.
that you could extend it either way if you had family or whatever in another part of the country to go visit. So thanks very much, Sekwak and Paul, for coming on and doing this, and thank you for all of you who viewed
Yeah,
it.
Elizabeth, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I really
Not
appreciate
at all.
it.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
You know, it's good to see such a well-organized tour happening, I think, and
Thank you.
lots of different
Yes, and
you know.
we will have some fun too at the Cobblestone pub. Plenty of good Irish
Oh,
food.
absolutely. Yeah, any of the pubs are good.
All right.
Oh, hang on
Slán go
another
fóill, everybody.
comment. Yeah, Noreen says it does look like a great trip. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Have a great time.
Thank you.
And I hope you do
Bye-bye.
get to go. Take care.